Hey guys, my name is Sammarco and I'm a contributor with MeidasTouch. We need to talk about the staggering number of people in Trump's inner circles that have exposed him over the years. It's quite literally an insane amount. These are people that know him and worked with him and then came out on the other side and said he's completely unfit to be president. It would be funny if it wasn't so frightening. Some of them have even made clear that we should be absolutely terrified if he's somehow reelected. Not gonna lie, a lot of these whistleblowers give off the vibe of someone who just witnessed a murder and now they're running for their lives. Isn't that a nice way to imagine the highest office in the land? Yeah, no. One of the most recent people to come out was longtime Trump employee Brian Butler. He just delivered a scathing interview to CNN about Trump illegally hiding and moving classified documents. Listen here.
Trump kind of leaves this path of carnage in his wake, of the people around him that become wrapped up in these investigations and scandals. And is that what you feel like is happening
I felt
here?
like it was a total no-win situation for me. I mean, they're asking me questions about one of my best friends. I'm being honest, but I also have a bad feeling that what I'm saying is getting him into trouble. It's just not, nobody should have to go through that. And, for him to get up there all the time and say the things he says about, about this being a witch hunt and everything, it's all, he just can't take responsibility for anything.
Then, of course, we have Bill Barr, his former attorney general.
Attacks on Jack Smith. I mean, he calls him deranged. He called him a crackhead once. He implied that he had something to do with the cocaine that was found at the White House. I mean, when you hear those comments that he makes about the person who's prosecuting him, what do you think?
To me, it's amazing that you read through the indictment and his behavior in that indictment, and it's nauseating. It's despicable behavior. Whether it's criminal or not, someone who engaged in that kind of bullying about a process that is fundamental to our system and to our self-government shouldn't be anywhere near the Oval Office.
Then there's his former Secretary of Defense, James Mattis.
And now, breaking from The Atlantic, the former Secretary of Defense, General James Mattis, who has rarely spoken out, I should say, has come out with this blistering condemnation of Trump. Quote, Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who does not try to unite the American people, does not even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years of this deliberate effort. We are witnessing the consequences of 3 years without mature leadership. We can unite without him, drawing on the strengths inherent in our civil society.
Then his other former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper.
Secretary Esper, in addition to those developments last night, you also saw another development happening in Florida when it comes to your former boss, former President Trump, announcing he is running for president. What's your reaction?
I wish he wouldn't. I think he's unfit for office. I thought his remarks were very subdued and uninspiring, and I think that it's time for the Republican Party, and frankly both parties, to move on to a next generation of leaders, and particularly the leaders that can unify our country and get us back to a more normal governance where we treat each other with dignity and respect and we work on policy issues and not on personal attacks.
His former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Milley.
We are unique among the world's armies. We are unique among the world's military. We don't take an oath to a country. We don't take an oath to a tribe. We don't take an oath to a religion. We don't take an oath to a king or a queen or to a tyrant or a dictator. And we don't take an oath to a wannabe dictator. We don't take an oath to an individual. We take an oath to the Constitution, and we take an oath to the idea that is America, and we're willing to die to protect it.
His first Secretary of State when he was in office, Rex Tillerson.
It was challenging for me, coming from the disciplined, highly process-oriented ExxonMobil Corporation, to go to work for a man who is pretty undisciplined, doesn't like to read, doesn't read briefing reports, doesn't like to get into the details of a lot of things, but rather just kind of says, look, this is what I believe, and you can try to convince me otherwise, but most of the time you're not going to do that.
How did your relationship go off the rails?
Well, I think part of it was obviously we are starkly different in our styles. We did not have a common value system. When the president would say, well, here's what I want to do, and here's how I want to do it. And I'd have to say to him, well, Mr. President, I understand what you want to do, but you can't do it that way. It violates the law. It violates a treaty. You know, he got really frustrated. I didn't know how to conduct my affairs with him any other way than in a very straightforward fashion.
His second national security advisor, H.R. McMaster.
And I said, there are many reasons for this assault on the Capitol, but foremost among them was the president's exhortations, was the president's sustained disinformation, what you covered earlier in the show, denying the results of the election, spreading these unfounded conspiracy theories and claims of widespread corruption. And so I think what we just saw is we saw the absence of leadership, really anti-leadership, and what that can do to our country. You know, we are in traumas, and you just talked about these with Ron, right? We have this quadruple trauma of a pandemic, a recession associated with the pandemic, the social divisions laid bare by George Floyd's murder and the aftermath, and now this vitriolic partisan political season that we're still mired in. Now, when you're into trauma, you need a leader to assure the American people, to allay fears, instead of inciting fears and making them feel even more disenfranchised. Remember what Franklin Delano Roosevelt said during World War II. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. We've seen a president stoking fears amidst these crises.
His third national security advisor, John Bolton.
Well, it's a sign he doesn't have the slightest idea what he's doing. I mean, most presidents we think of have policy agendas. Trump does not have a policy agenda. He doesn't have a philosophy other than the greater glorification of Donald Trump. So I think it's completely accurate and quite consistent for Trump to say he wants retribution against his adversaries, and he will try and use the Justice Department. He may try and use the Defense Department. And we saw evidence of it in the first term. I don't know whether I'm happy to say, but I was certainly a target for the publication of my book. He said in more times than I can count that he wanted John Kerry prosecuted for violating the Logan Act, which, by the way, he was never able to do. The real question in a second term is how much of that he will go beyond pontificating about and actually try. I think the level that he will try is much higher than in the first term, and I think that should be a warning to everybody.
His second chief of staff, John Kelly.
To CNN, Kelly calls Trump a hypocrite, saying he is, quote, not truthful regarding his position on the protection of unborn life, on women, on minorities, on evangelical Christians, on Jews, on working men and women. And he concludes Trump is, quote, a person that has nothing but contempt for our democratic institutions, our Constitution, and the rule of law. He concludes, there is nothing more that can be said. God help us.
He's doing a great job as chief of staff.
A stunning repudiation by a man who worked side by side with Trump longer than any other of Trump's many chiefs of staff.
His former communications director, Stephanie Grisham.
I'm telling my truth, and I'm hoping that people will see what it was like so we cannot repeat history. I am terrified of him running for president in 2024. I don't think he is fit for the job.
His former Secretary of Education, Elaine Chao.
I think the events at the Capitol, however they occurred, were shocking. And it was something that, as I mentioned in my statement, that I could not put aside. And at a particular point, the events were such that it was impossible for me to continue, given my personal values and my philosophy. I came as an immigrant to this country. I believe in this country. I believe in a peaceful transfer of power. I believe in democracy. And so it was a decision that I made on my own.
His first Secretary of the Navy, Richard Spencer. Trump has very little understanding of what it means to be in the military, to fight ethically, or to be governed by a uniform set of rules and practices. His first Homeland Security advisor, Tom Bossert. This is beyond wrong and illegal. It's un-American. The president undermined American democracy baselessly for months. As a result, he's culpable for the siege and an utter disgrace. Despite of him, not because of him, police will regain control and prosecute those involved. His White House lawyer, Ty Cobb.
But he basically points out that Trump relentlessly, as you have highlighted, puts forth claims that simply are not true, that have no foundation, that cannot be supported by the facts.
And his own Vice President, Mike Pence.
The former president had this to say about you. He said, quote, "I feel badly for Mike Pence, who is attracting no crowds, enthusiasm, or loyalty from people who, as a member of the Trump administration, should be loving him. The VP had power that Mike didn't understand." So you hear there, he is still claiming to this day that you had the power to reject electoral votes. And his lawyers are suggesting reasonable people can disagree on whether you had that authority.
Well, Dana, President Trump was wrong then, and he's wrong now. I had no right to overturn the election. Very clear that under the Constitution of the United States, Article 2, my responsibility as Vice President, as President of the Senate, was to preside over a joint session of Congress where the Constitution says the electoral votes shall be opened and shall be counted. I really do believe that people all across this country are coming to realize that more every day. Although, as I've told you before, Dana, over the last 2 years, I've been deeply humbled how many Americans have come up to me and expressed their appreciation. I mean, I truly do believe that we kept our oath to the Constitution that day. But the American people deserve to know that President Trump, asked me to put him over my oath to the Constitution. But I kept my oath, and I always will. And I'm running for president in part because I think anyone who puts themselves over the Constitution should never be president of the United States. I mean, our Constitution is more important than any one man. Our country is more important than any one man's career.
Look, this list could go on for days. There's so many others that I didn't even mention. But the point is there's an absolutely unprecedented amount of people in Trump's inner circles that have come out and exposed him for what he truly is, a fraud. As the old saying goes, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then it probably is a duck. In this case, Donald is definitely a duck, but not the cute, funny Donald duck. An angry, narcissistic, lying, mentally unstable duck. The worst part about all of this is that if he manages to get reelected, these are not the people that will be inhabiting his administration. It's going to be the most extreme versions of these people, the people that he deems as loyal allies. I'm talking Laura Loomer, Roger Stone and company. It's terrifying. If Donald Trump wins in 2024, it's not going to be the same as 2016. It's going to be much, much worse.
Love this video? Make sure you stay up to date on the latest breaking news and all things Meidas by signing up to the MeidasTouch newsletter at MeidasTouch.com/newsletter.